and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi p234g 18-volt impact driver. Now this impact driver has been officially discontinued and you can no longer buy it at Home Depot or any other authorized Ryobi reseller, or seller I should say. But you can still find it via third-party sellers. You just won't be able to get it, well, with a warranty. Is it still going to be something that people should consider? I think it actually still has a decent, well, draw for a variety of reasons, and we'll discuss that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And starting off at the bottom of the tool, we have the 18-volt battery slot, which will accept any of Ryobi's 18-volt batteries. Overall, the slot is nice and secure, and I am a fan of the fact that it is compatible with all the old generations, like the old NiCads, all the way up to the new generation of lithium batteries. Overall, it is definitely a good feature that the tool is backwards compatible and forward compatible, and quite frankly, I think that is a great selling point for Ryobi tools. The battery fits in there nice and secure, and there is very little wiggle or play, so it gets a pass. Moving on. And moving upward, we have the rubberized grip. Now the rubberized grip, well, it does have a rubberized texture to it, but it is a very hard rubberized texture, and it is a little bit slicker than some of Ryobi's newer tools and the rubberized textures that they have. Overall, I don't think you're going to have to worry about the rubberized texture becoming loose and peeling off, but at the same time, it's definitely not as comfortable to hold as one of Ryobi's newer tools. So it gets a pass, but I think this is definitely an area where this tool is showing its age. But it still is acceptable. So, moving on. And next up we have the bit holder, one of my favorite features on this particular tool. It's super handy, it's super convenient, and if you don't like the bit holder, well, that's your opinion. My opinion is it's wonderful, and I would never have gotten rid of it because it's super useful, and it's just something that I adore about Ryobi tools, or at least used to adore about Ryobi tools. This particular tool, since it's older, still has it, and it's definitely a major pro in my opinion. And next up we have the magnet tray. Now the magnet tray on this particular tool is still a large magnet tray because, well, they were still putting some money into their tools and keeping them affordable at this point in time, and overall is definitely still a beloved feature that I absolutely adore. The magnet is big and it's strong enough to keep small screws and even medium-sized screws in place without having to worry about them falling off if you shake the tool too much, and quite frankly this is still a great feature even today, and it's a feature that I use all the time. So quite frankly, this is another great feature of this particular tool, and it's definitely an improvement over the newer generation of this tool, which nerfed the size of the magnet tray or reduced it to the point where it was no longer useful, as they were beginning to wean us off of this particular feature on this particular tool. But on this generation of tool, it still has it, so it gets a pass. And next up we have the trigger. Now the trigger on this particular impact driver is a plastic trigger with a nice rubberized texture at the front of it, which is definitely a nice little feature, and it has a great pull with good definition in between the different speeds. And there are good speeds on this particular impact driver. There's a nice slow speed, and there's plenty of speeds in between the low speed and the high speed, which is also nice once you get up to the high end. So I really don't have any complaints about the trigger on this particular tool. I've been using this impact driver for a couple years now, and I've actually bought one for somebody else that I knew that didn't have an impact driver, and they enjoy using it as well. So quite frankly, I have been perfectly satisfied with the performance coming out of this particular tool's trigger, and I have other tools that are more expensive that I don't think have as good of a trigger. So in my opinion, the trigger is definitely a pro on this particular tool. So yeah, moving on. Now, the safety selector switch on this tool is functional, and I don't have any major complaints about it other than the fact that it's a little bit tricky sometimes to get into the lock position, but it does prevent the trigger from becoming activated, so it does its job. It's just not as good as it could be, but then again, it really isn't that big of a deal, and you won't have any issues switching in between forward and reverse, so it gets a pass. It's just not as good as I personally would have liked, but it's still not horrible. And at the front of the impact driver, we have the 1/4 inch bit holder or chuck. Overall, the bit holder or chuck on this particular impact driver is about as manual as you can get. It is it's a manual bit holder. You have to pull it forward to insert the bit, and you have to pull it forward to take out the bit. So it's manual. That's about all I can say about it. It's tough, it's manual, it does a good job. It's not as nice as some of the newer impact drivers and the quick change features that they feature, but for the price that you're going to be paying for this particular impact driver, you don't really have too much to complain about, so it gets a pass. And last but not least, at the rear of the tool, we have a strapping point, which is about the only way that you can attach any sort of strap to this particular tool, since there are no belt clip points at all on this particular tool. Overall, the strapping point does its job just fine, and I don't have any major complaints about it, so it gets a pass. And without a battery, the tool weighs 1,216 grams, or a little over 2.5 pounds. And with a battery, it will weigh right at 1,917 grams, or about 4.2 pounds. So overall, it's a little bit heavier, but it's still not bad. And if that added weight means it's going to be a little bit more reliable, I think that's a perfectly acceptable trade-off. So moving on. Okay, let's talk a little bit about this tool and what I think of it and how it feels in the hand. Overall, this particular tool is a little bit on the heavy side, but I think that actually means that it's going to be a little bit more reliable, or at least that's been my experience with this particular tool. I've owned it for about 2 years now, and I ended up buying a second one for a family member because they needed an impact driver, and I found one at a good price. Now, I ended up paying about $25 with batteries when I got mine at a pawn shop locally, and I think that was a fantastic deal, and it probably was one of the best deals that I've found considering how often I use this particular tool. I've been keeping it out in a greenhouse, and it's been out there through the winter, through the summer, just all year round, and I haven't had any major issues with it. So I think that's another awesome thing about this particular tool, that it's been reliable even after buying it used and being kept in a bad location for keeping tools. So I really think that this is a good tool to consider. Now, like I said earlier, it is a little bit heavy in the hand. My Makita is definitely lighter weight, but I'll gladly take the trade-off if it means it's going to stay reliable. Now, when it comes to the inch-pounds or whatever the torque measurement is, it's about 1,500 inch-pounds, and it probably is fairly close to that. It's not going to be as powerful as a newer brushless impact driver, but if you're looking for reliability and a cost-effective impact driver, this isn't a bad impact driver to consider. They're running about, I think was about $40 over on Amazon, and that means you won't be getting a warranty or the 3-year warranty, but considering how well it's held up for me, I don't think you necessarily really need that, especially if you don't do a ton of work with an impact driver and you just want a backup or something just to have on hand if you don't do a lot of construction work. And so I think it's a great little option to consider. And considering that the features like the bit holder and magnet tray are harder and harder to find, and on the newest models they don't feature those at all, if you like these features, this would definitely be the impact driver I'd be looking at if you're not looking for a brushless one. So at the end of the day, I really do like using this impact driver. It's probably the impact driver that I use most of the time because of where I keep it, and it just has been fantastic. So yeah, let's move on to the pros and cons. Cheap. Overall, you can find this tool for a fairly reasonable price at a variety of different places, everywhere from pawn shops to eBay to Craigslist to Facebook Marketplace to even Amazon. So in my opinion, that's a pro. Tough. Overall, I bought this tool used, and it was in not that great condition when I ended up buying it, and it's held up great over the last 2 years. And I have to say that it's still a tool that I use fairly often because of where I keep it. So in my opinion, it's another pro because it's a tough tool. Mag tray. The mag tray is still incorporated on this particular tool, and it's a feature that I love. I know some people aren't a fan of it, but in my opinion, this is a great feature, and it's a pro on my list at least. Bit holder. The bit holder is another super convenient feature for when you're working with multiple kinds of fasteners, and it's a feature that I use all the time, so it's another pro in my opinion. 18 volt. 18 volt means it's going to be compatible with all of your 18 volt Ryobi batteries, and you'll be able to adapt batteries over from different brands via third-party adapters, which you can find on Amazon and eBay for fairly cheap. So in my opinion, this is a pro. Next up, we have the trigger. The trigger of this particular tool is great. It has plenty of definition in between the different speeds, and it has good low speeds and good high speeds. So overall, this is definitely a pro in my opinion. And the first meh would be that it's heavy. It's not really so heavy that it's uncomfortable to use, but it's not so light that it's fun to use either. Overall, I'll definitely give it a middle of the pack rating when it comes to its weight. And for me personally, I actually enjoy having it built a little bit better simply because that means it's going to be a little bit more reliable generally. So overall, this is definitely just a meh. Next up, we have brushed. Yeah, it's a brush tool. It's not going to be as fancy as a brushless tool, but it's still going to be completely usable, and I think most people will be perfectly satisfied with it. So yeah, moving on. And the one and only con would be the chuck. Now, the chuck is reliable, and it doesn't have any major issues. It's practically bulletproof. Well, I haven't actually tested that, but it's tough. My issue with the chuck is that there's no quick change feature, and if you're working in an awkward position or up on top of a ladder and you need to change your bit, it's a little bit tricky. So well, at the end of the day, it's not really that big of a con. It just is a con. So yeah. And that's it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular tool. Overall, I actually really like this tool. I like the trigger, I like the bit holder, I like the magnet tray, I like how reliable it's been, I like the price I paid for it, and quite frankly, the only thing I don't really like about it would probably be the fact that the bit holder isn't a quick switch bit holder. Well, technically it is. It just doesn't have the features that some of the newer impact drivers have. And that's not really that big of a deal. So, would I recommend this impact driver? If you can find it for a reasonable price and decent condition, yes, I would recommend it. I think it's got a great potential for being a long-lasting impact driver in your personal collection of tools, and so I think that's something you need to consider, especially the way that the world seems to be going at the moment. Reliability is important, and having a tool that's reliable is super useful and just nice to have around, and so that's why I still think it's a decent tool to consider. So yeah, I would recommend it if you can find one at a decent price in good condition. So just look around on Craigslist, eBay, Facebook Marketplace, or at pawn shops, and I'm sure you'll be able to find one, and I'm sure you'll be able to get a good deal on it. So yeah, and that's it for this video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. God bless.